Hello, I'm Lawrence. Welcome to Slices of London, where I'll be showing you various areas of London and talking various themes in and around London. Unlike a loaf of bread, which has a finite number of slices, Slices of London is infinite. We could go on forever and ever, and it probably will take me forever to get through the whole of London. Where we are today is in Fitzrovia, which in my opinion is one of the most underrated parts of London. Very interesting, lots of interesting characters have lived and drank in the establishments in this area. And it was a few years ago, we're north of Soho. A few years ago, there was a push to call this area NoHo, but the residents of Fitzrovia were not very happy about being called NoHo. Sounds a bit like No Hope, doesn't it? So that got squashed, thankfully. What you can see in the background here is the British Telecom Tower, which was originally called the Post Office Tower when it was first built in the early 1960s, and at the time in 1963, it was the tallest building in London. I think at the moment it's about number 18 or 19 on the list of tallest buildings, and I'm sure by the end of 2023 it probably won't even be in the top 20 anymore. So that just shows you the amount of building that's gone on in London generally, and those are the buildings we'll get to eventually in future videos. But the Post Office Tower itself used to have a revolving restaurant on the top floor, and this went round every 23 minutes. So slowly enough for you to enjoy your food. You know, food wasn't splashing all over the place. And it was also once used in an episode of The Goodies in the 1970s. The Goodies comedy series, in which was called Kitty Kong, a take on King Kong, of course. And Kitty Kong was a giant cat that was going around destroying London. And there's a scene where the newsreader is talking about Kitty Kong and what Kitty Kong's been getting up to. And in the background, you see Kitty Kong climbing up the Post Office Tower and the tower sort of falling to the side with the cat on it. So it's not all going to be quite as weird as that in Fitzrovia, but I have to say that there are quite a lot of quite unusual things and unusual people that have frequented the area. So this is the Fitzrovia mural, which was designed by Mick Jones and Simon Barber in 1980, and this is really a statement on what was happening in the area at the time. It's quite political. I won't get too much into the political machinations of what this was really all about, but you know, this can all be looked up online. But in short, we have in the middle we have a boy with blonde hair and a blue shirt and trousers. And this young boy is supposed to be the future of London, which is, if you look at his eyes, you kind of wonder about the future of London, don't you? It's a little bit worrying. He looks actually terrified about the future of London, if we're honest. Just above his head, you have a few people seated, and the fellow in the purple jacket there, with his back to us, is supposed to be Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas was a great frequenter of the pubs of Fitzrovia. In fact, it would be true to say he was a great frequenter of pubs everywhere, really, Dylan Thomas. Died very young, famous for his play-stroke poem called Under Milk Wood, which is, if you ever have listened to it, read by Richard Burton playing the narrator. It's absolutely fantastic, wonderful piece of work. Above him, to the right of that table, you have some guys playing basketball, and this is a comment on the lack of space in Fitzrovia and the lack of space, I guess, in central London generally. And what the artists are saying was it'd be nice if there was a bit more space for kids to play, for there to be games. Lots and lots of other stuff going on. This is a bit like one of those Lowry paintings, where every time you look at it, you know, you discover something else. Down on the right hand side, sort of towards the bottom here, you've got a guy eating a chicken leg and a cake and what looks like a big piece of salami next to him, a bottle of wine. You know, this is all. This guy is obviously really gorging himself, and this bit is all about the excesses of Soho. You know, so too much wine, too much food, etc., etc. Again, it's probably a comment on the fact that, you know, some have a lot and some have very little. If you then look on the left-hand side of this mural, you have right at the bottom a an Indian father and perhaps his wife or perhaps his daughter. We don't know. She's got her back to us, making what's probably a sari. There was quite an Indian community here in Fitzrovia at one time, so this is reminding us of that. And then just below them, a character who's a real life character. He was a waiter who worked in one of the restaurants here, so you can see he's got his menu. If you're here in Fitzrovia, it is very close to Goodge Street Station. This mural. Come out Goodge Street Station, turn left. It's on the left, and it is worth, if you're in the neighbourhood passing by, just looking at it, because you could actually sit and look at this for a very long time indeed. So there it is, the Fitzrovia mural. Just one thing I forgot to mention is this couple right in the foreground at the bottom. I mean, they are the largest images of characters on this mural. And the thing about these two is that I haven't got a clue who they are, and I haven't been able to find out who they are. So if anybody out there does know, that would be great if you could let me know. But I would imagine that this is a couple that maybe the artists knew from the area, that lived in the area or live in the area. But they are very much focal points, really, of the mural at the bottom. But I haven't been able to find out who they are. Okay, so here we are at one of my favourite museums in London. This is the Pollock's Toy Museum, which began in the Victorian period, actually, and it was owned by a guy called John Reddington. Reddington had a daughter who worked in his shop, and she fell in love with a man called Benjamin Pollock, who was a customer, and eventually it fell into his hands. He started to run the business. Now, it did take a hit in Hoxton during the Second World War. Of course, Hoxton being towards the east end of London, those kinds of areas were taking big hits in World War II from German bombing. And in the 1950s, this was taken over by a woman called Margaret Fordry, whose grandson still runs the business as of today. Today is February the 11th, 2023, by the way. And their lease is up. Well, it's up, so they can't. The rent has gone up, and they can't afford the rent. So. Very sadly, it looks as if they are going to have to either move the business or perhaps close altogether. So there have been various quite well-known names down the years who have frequented this museum, who have been fans of it, such as Sir Ralph Richardson, Joanna Lumley, Charlie Chaplin, and if any of you out there would like to help bail them out, I think that would be a wonderful thing. The buildings, by the way, there's two buildings really here. You've got this one on the left is a 18th century building, and it's one of the oldest buildings in Fitzrovia. Next to it is a 19th century building, so Victorian. So you've got Victorian and Georgian buildings here. So it's kind of two in one. And where you would normally go to pay your entry fee when the business is open would be on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, here there's a toy shop. So please, if anybody out there would like to save the business, step forward. Okay, so we're standing on the corner here of Goodge Street and Charlotte Street, and as you can see, quite a lot of mixed development here. Lots of old buildings, a few new buildings chucked in, lots going on, lots and lots of cafes and places. So it's quite a buzzy area, really. I mean, it is almost like almost as buzzy as Soho in some ways. Goodge Street is named after John Goodge, who was a carpenter and a property developer in the area. And Charlotte Street is named after Charlotte, who was the wife of Queen Charlotte, who was the wife of George III. As you can see, it's Saturday morning, and it is already getting quite busy here. We're standing on Colville Place here, the corner of Colville Place and Charlotte Street, and this is a wonderful little enclave of Fitzrovia. As you can see, look at all these wonderful plants and residential buildings too. And we are now going to go into what would be considered a little oasis in the middle of Fitzrovia. There is a little bit of green space here, so let's go and have a look at that. We're standing in Crabtree Fields, a nice little open space in the middle of Fitzrovia. Now, of course, once upon a time, this area would have been all countryside anyway, as most of London was. The area really began to be built up in the 18th century. This was, tragically, the area was bombed, and this was all sort of rubble after World War II. But what happened was they then built a car park on top of it, and then they got rid of the car park and put this lovely little open space here, which is quite nice because most places in London they get rid of open spaces, don't they, and then build car parks. But they've done it the other way round here. So it's called Crabtree Fields. Looked after initially by named after crabapple trees. Looked after by John Goodge's wife, John Goodge the carpenter, who was after whom Goodge Street is named. But if you're down here in Fitzrovia and you want to have a little sit down and maybe a cup of coffee or a sandwich or whatever, just nip into Crabtree Fields there. And actually, given the mural that I was talking about at the beginning of this video, we do have here the open space, and I think this is probably what Mick Jones and Simon Barber. Um, this would have been something that would have been happy to have happened, obviously, as a result, maybe of their mural and maybe of people residents in the area, protesting about the lack of open space. So here it is, beautiful little enclave in London. We're on Charlotte Street, the Charlotte Street Hotel. Beautiful. I love this wonderful sort of mint colour green, I guess you would call that. Very big British flag outside, and look at those lamps, wonderful lamps, those wonderful green lamps. They are listed. So we have listed buildings and listed churches, etc. These are listed lamps. This is the Fitzroy Tavern, and this is probably where Fitzrovia gets its name from. Full of all sorts of interesting Bohemian characters. Back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, people such as Dylan Thomas, George Orwell, T.S. Eliot, all sorts came here, including also a woman called Nina Hamlet, very interesting character. Little known about her really, but Nina Hamlet was a Welsh artist. Quite a few Welsh connections in the area actually. Augustus John, the painter, also used to come here and drink, and Augustus John, Dylan Thomas, Nina Hamlet, all Welsh. So very, very sort of popular with those Bohemian crowds. And she was a woman who was quite wild actually. She had affairs with various people, including Modigliani, the painter. And apparently she went to Paris and used to dance naked on the tables in the clubs there, not for money, just for a laugh. She did die falling from a window of her flat, quite tragically, and of course there is a little bit of conjecture as to whether she jumped or fell. And she sadly, towards the end of her life, ended up going from pub to pub, really telling people the story of her life and getting them to buy her drinks in return for stories about her life. But it's a fantastic pub inside, and hopefully, let's see if we can get a chance to maybe film in there. Yeah, look at this room. I mean, it's just stunning. This is the back room of the Fitzroy Tavern. It's beautiful. It's real Victorian bling. It's not for everybody. Some people might find this rather tacky. I think it's absolutely delightful. And if you're in the area, the Fitzrovia, just Fitzroy Tavern rather, just come and have a drink here. It's fantastic. So here we have a wonderful sketch of some of the characters who frequented the Bohemian pubs. I think it's pretty unlikely that all of these people were in the pub at the same time. In fact, I know it wasn't, because some of the dates just wouldn't add up. But just to pick out a few here, you've got here far left with the blue jacket and the bow tie. That's Dylan Thomas, the poet, the Welsh poet, who probably drank in just about every pub in London. Then here you've got with the beard and the hat. This is Augustus John, Welsh poet. And then just sitting across from him is Nina Hamlet, the Welsh artist. So you've got Wales very well, sort of recognised, which is not the right word, but recognised here at this table. Then you've got, let's see, yes, you've got Walter Sickert here, the artist who was part of the Camden group. And then this gentleman here is Jacob Epstein, the sculptor. You might have seen his sculpture around London. There's stuff on St James's Underground and various places in London where he sculpted on buildings. And then this guy in the middle, you may recognise him because of the fez. That's Tommy Cooper. Tommy Cooper, the great comedian magician, the man whose tricks always went wrong, but he always knew exactly what he was doing, really. For me, he could just come on stage and look into the camera and you'd laugh, really. He just had that quality. And then next to him, Bud Flanagan. Now, Bud Flanagan is a character that some may have heard the name, know exactly who he was. He was a comedian, a writer, and he was responsible. Flanagan and Allen, who were a double act, they wrote the song, the theme tune to Dad's Army. You know that one? Who do you think you are kidding, Mr. Hitler? If you think old England's done. You probably know it if you've seen Dad's Army. You certainly know it. So yeah, wonderful. It's just a wonderful sketch of all these great characters who frequented the pubs of well, frequented this pub, obviously the Fitzroy Tavern, but frequented all various of the pubs around Fitzrovia. So this pub here is the Newman Arms. It's a nice little pub, nice and little being both operative words in this case. It is nice and little. And it's been name checked in fiction a couple of times. It was named in George Orwell's book 1984. This is where the proles used to drink, in the Newman Arms. And it's also been film checked in a film called Peeping Tom, which is a rather harrowing film to watch, but also quite brilliant. If you know the film, it's quite a harrowing film. It's also, if you look up to the top window, top middle window that is, you can see an etching of a woman looking through the window. This is indicating to us that this used to be a brothel, because this was at one time a red light district. The pub was also used as a soup kitchen at one point by a woman called Louise Michel. Louise Michel was a French anarchist who was involved in the Paris Commune. So she's kind of a real figurehead of that movement of the time, which was towards the end of the 19th century. So we'll come on to her in a little while as well. Okay, probably not the most glamorous spots that I'll ever do in my walks here. It's a bit of a mess, and sadly, and I had to say quite disgracefully, somebody has graffitied all over this mural, and it is a lovely mural of some very interesting people. So I don't know who would get it into their mind to think that that was a good idea. Anyway, just going through these characters fairly swiftly. Top left here is a character called Equiano Oluda, who was a slave originally, got his freedom, came to this country, and was a real core celeb. He wrote books, and he became very wealthy, leaving the equivalent today, as of 2023, of approximately 90 grand in his will, which is a fair bit of money for somebody who came from nothing. Then on the other side of him, on the right hand side, you've got George Bernard Shaw, the playwright. George Bernard Shaw with a big white beard and his hand on his hip. He was a vegetarian, and he famously said, "At my funeral, I will have all the animals that I've never eaten." Bottom left, you can barely see. You might just about be able to see her left eye. That's Marie Stopes. Marie Stopes, who was the pioneer of family planning in this country. And then on the other side of that, you've got a guy called Francis de Miranda, who was a Venezuelan revolutionary. Also completely covered by the graffiti in the middle is a fellow called Simon Bolivar, who was another South American revolutionary around the same time as Francisco de Miranda. They were both trying to get independence for Venezuela and several other South American countries. On the other side of this mural, you've got on the far right a woman called Cynthia Williams, she was a local woman who was very involved in theatre, so sort of local hero. And then next to her, gazing towards the image there of the post office tower on the wall, is Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf, the writer of such books as The Waves and the other books, which names I can't remember. But she was the writer and part of what was known as the Bloomsbury set. Now, both George Bernard Shaw and Virginia Woolf lived in Fitzroy Square at different times, and Fitzroy Square is going to be, we're going to be there fairly shortly. I'm just going to be making one or two more stops first before that. Okay, so here we are on a different day, a lovely rainy, grey London day. I'm often asked, when am I going to talk about Dickens when I'm doing walks? And well, here's the moment. Dickens lived here twice as a boy. Also, up the road from this place where he used to live is a block of flats that used to be a workhouse. And if you think about it, Oliver Twist ends up in a workhouse, very likely that Dickens as a boy was inspired, if that's the right word, or certainly the workhouse must have given him some sort of emotional feeling to write about it so powerfully. And it may well have been here on Cleveland Street, the Cleveland Street Workhouse as it was known, where he took his inspiration for Oliver Twist. Yeah, so this is the building that used to be a workhouse, 19th century workhouse. It's being developed at the moment. I think it's going to be apartments, as are so many of these old buildings. But at least they have kept the look of the original Victorian building, although there's quite a lot of new brick. You can probably see that. Yes, this is one of probably two workhouses that Dickens based his character Oliver Twist on, where Oliver Twist ends up in the workhouse. Places where lots of children would run away from. They were terrible places, actually. The workhouse. People would enter the workhouses because they had no money. They were poor, and they were more or less punished for being poor. They were given menial, ridiculous tasks to do and treated very badly. And this is why we have these characters these children who run away from the workhouses. But this is certainly. The other workhouse is based in Barnet, but that is not there anymore. There's a hospital on that site now. So this one is extant. It's the original building of the workhouse, still pretty much more or less there, really, as it was back in the 19th century. Hey, welcome to Fitzroy Square. Beautiful, beautiful square. One of the most beautiful squares in London, in my esteemed opinion. This lovely building here, which is unfortunately covered in scaffold today, number 19 Fitzroy Square, is where a woman called Louise Michel used to live. Now, Louise Michel was a French anarchist. She was involved in the Paris Commune, came over to this country at a time when lots of rebellious people from Europe, lots of people with strong political views, such as Karl Marx, were tolerated here in this country where they weren't tolerated perhaps in some other European cities and countries. She ran a school here called the International School, and it was a school for the children of factory workers, really. It was closed down because police found a bomb in the basement, and unfortunately she was very unlucky, really, because the bomb was probably put there by one of her assistants, a man who was later arrested. After that, it became the home of Duncan Grant and Vanessa Bell. Vanessa Bell was the sister of Virginia Woolf, and these were part of the Bloomsbury set, of which they said they lived in squares, they sat in circles, and they loved in triangles. I think they loved probably in more sided shapes even than triangles at times, but there you go. That's another story, perhaps for another day. And Virginia Woolf is where we're going to go now. Here at number 29, we're now on the west side of Fitzroy Square, is where Virginia Woolf and George Bernard Shaw lived. Not together at the same time, I hasten to add. Virginia Woolf, as you can see, I just mentioned, the sister of Vanessa Bell, and the better known of the sisters. She wrote To the Lighthouse, she wrote The Waves, and she also wrote her first novel, The Voyage Out, whilst living in this house. She has been acclaimed as one of the greatest writers of our history, and I'm not going to argue with anyone over that particular fact. George Bernard Shaw, obviously a little bit before Virginia Woolf's time, he wrote Pygmalion, which became My Fair Lady. He wrote Arms of the Man, Candida, Mrs. Warren's Profession, and he wrote Mrs. Warren's Profession whilst living here. Now, I think he took the name Warren from Warren Street, because we're quite close to Warren Street. And Mrs. Warren's profession, well, I'll let you read the play and then you can work out what her profession was. But let me just say that Fitzrovia in those days had a similar kind of reputation to Soho. So I think you can probably guess what Mrs. Warren's profession was. A great man for quotes, George Bernard Shaw. Two of my favourites of his are the Italians had Da Vinci, the Greeks had Aristotle, the English had Shakespeare, and the Irish have my wonderful self. So hardly a modest man. But probably my favourite quote of all, and it was a bit of repartee with Winston Churchill, and nobody ever got the better of Winston Churchill, was when he was putting on a play, George Bernard Shaw, and he sent Churchill tickets to his play. And he said, "Dear Mr. Churchill, here are 2 tickets for the opening night of my play. Bring a friend, ... if you have one." Churchill replied, "Dear Mr. Shaw, I'm very sorry I can't come to the first night of your play. I will come to the second night, ... if you have one." So never try and take on Winston Churchill in a debating duel. So I've shown you now briefly the north and the west sides of Fitzroy Square, and that's been a bit of a cheat really, because actually the first sides of Fitzroy Square to be built were in the 18th century. This is 19th century stuff. And they were built by Robert Adam, designed by Robert Adam, the great Scottish designer. So let's go over now to the south side and have a look, see what we can find there. Wonderful building here. Look at this. This is a bit more like it, isn't it? This is typical Robert Adam style. And it was a townhouse. 2 of its original residents were a couple of women called Eve Gore Booth and Esther Roper. They were suffragists. Now, the difference between suffragists and suffragettes was that suffragists wanted to change everything kind of, I suppose you could say, legally, by petition, by writing to government, etc., etc. Whereas the suffragettes were more militant. They said, well, we've had enough of all of this writing and petitioning. We're going to go out and start some action. So, things got a little bit more, I suppose you could use the word tasty when the suffragettes came to town. Absolutely beautiful building. This is the south side. The south side and the east side were the first sides of Fitzroy Square to be completed back in the mid to late 1700s. And in the early 20th century, this became the Amiga workshops, which was the creativity really of a man called Roger Fry. Roger Fry was a sort of artist critic, a bit of a Renaissance man, and people such as Vanessa Bell and Duncan Grant, who I've mentioned already, had works at the Amiga workshops. They would put things on exhibition, and they were to be bought. They were for people to come in and buy, and they would refuse to label who had created the pieces, because they wanted people not to have preconceptions about how good or bad something was, depending on who had created it. So people would buy stuff and then find out that it was by a completely unknown unknown potter or unknown artist. So it was really, really good idea, actually. Made things much more equal in terms of who could sell what. It then became the London Foot Clinic, of all things. And it was that until something like 20, 30 years ago. Today it is used for, it was residential again for a little while, but today it's more used for events. But it is very much typical of the classical Robert Adam style. This side of the square some of it was destroyed by bombing, so you might just be able to see a little bit of patchwork on the building there, that the building has been, the buildings on this side have been recreated in their original style. Okay, in the middle of this, what is actually a private garden, so we are not inside the garden at the moment because, well, we can't be. This is a sculpture by Naomi Blake called View, and this was installed here in 1977 to celebrate the Queen's, the late Queen's, Silver Jubilee. You also get a little bit of a glance at the houses over the other side, so we're looking there at the east side of Fitzroy Square, so at least I haven't cheated you, you've now seen every side of Fitzroy Square. So that's View by Naomi Blake. So that wraps up Fitzrovia, and I hope that those of you that didn't know the area very well or knew it a little bit will now see just how much is here, and we haven't even covered everything yet, but on my walking tours I do cover a little bit more. But these are sort of the highlights, really, of what, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated and fascinating parts of London. So thank you, one and all.